And by spending just 20 minutes in a natural environment that has that sort of richness, you could imagine walking into a greenhouse. You could imagine going out into a small garden space that has herbs or something sensory, right? The ability to sort of pay attention comes back by spending time in that kind of space.
Welcome to Healthier, Happier, Smarter, connecting with Wisconsin's outdoors through learning, stories, and communities. My name is Jaden.
And my name's Zaya.
What happens when learning moves outside the classroom?
You get healthier students, stronger communities, and deeper connections to nature.
Healthier, Happier, Smarter explores outdoor and environmental education across Wisconsin.
From schoolyards and forests to youth-led climate action and community programs. Join us as we share the stories shaping the future of learning and the outdoors.
Welcome to Happier, Healthier, Smarter.
Today, we're joined with Mary Michaud, an educator, public health professional, and certified horticultural therapist, working at the intersection of nature, learning, and health. She teaches in the School of Education at the University of Madison and serves on the advisory board for Green Schoolyards America and has spent over a decade advancing outdoor learning and equitable access to nature. Mary also brings deep experience in health and education policy and recently led a hands-on session using data and storytelling to drive nature-based change. Thank you, Mary, for being here with us today.
Great to be here.
Mary, we are very excited to have you. It is very nice to meet you. And as you know, this podcast is based on the idea that connecting to nature and taking learning outside through environmental education makes us healthier, happier, and smarter. So, to lead us off, can you tell us why is connecting with nature important to you?
Sure. There's so many reasons, daily reasons. And I think about my own experience. In my own experience and working with kids especially, I think connecting to that sense of awe in the natural world probably rises pretty close to the top. It has all kinds of benefits in and of itself. When I was in my 30s, right after I had my own children, I started to realize just how much fear and distrust, or maybe sort of indifference, so many people had of the natural world. And that's not how I grew up at all. I grew up in Waukesha County in a rural area of the Kettle Moraine. I grew up what we would call free range. I couldn't imagine being fearful of walking through a forest or a farm field. I mean, it was sort of my natural habitat. I was outside all the time. And, I'd climb 50 feet up into a white pine to take a look inside a red-winged blackbird's nest, right? Like, what's in there? I had a horse. I was really lucky. I didn't have a bike, but I had a horse because my dad was the local veterinarian. And he thought, free manure for my garden, free veterinary care. Okay, the economics work out. So I got a horse. And I would ride miles away from my house on my own when I was 9. I swam in deep lakes and cold rivers. I spent a lot of time observing and taking care of animals, both domestic and wild. I mean, yeah, that sort of feeling the awe of the natural world every day was pretty normal for me. Another, brief story about my dad, his hobby was taking care of sick and injured wild birds. So raptors, we had a lot of those. We had some fowl. And people would bring him these birds from all over the Kettle Moraine. And I was sort of his assistant, right? And I would come home from school and run down our long driveway. And he had his clinic at our house. So I'd run in the door and go to the cages. And one time, because I didn't know what I would find, right? And one time there was a massive snowy owl in one of the cages, and it sort of turned its big gleaming white head and basically looked a hole through my 10-year-old self with these big yellow eyes. And I mean, that kind of stare down with a snowy owl will give you a sense of awe if nothing else does.
Growing up in a city, I experienced the cornfields are very much scary place to be. Like I had the complete opposite of your experience. So just like knowing that there are educators out there who want to give students an experience the awe moment is just like, it's nice to hear. following up on that, like, how would you say that this has kind of like advanced throughout your career? Like giving these students this, ooh, I want to go out into nature and ride a wild horse.
My horse was pretty docile, but it's such a good question. I think that when I had my own kids and I recognized how many things I could show them and how fun that became, the discovery process, even as really little, really small kids, you know, telling them stories about how I grew up was captivating to them. You had to get them to go to bed somehow, like fall asleep somehow. So I'd make up stories, but I'd also just tell them stories about my adventures in the outdoors. And that really started me looking at how could I weave this into what I was doing, day to day. And I had been working in public health for quite a while and also medical care, sort of health services research, I'd say. It made sense to me to really just start where I was. And so when my kids started elementary school, I noticed a really overcrowded school. I noticed kids who seemed really pretty dysregulated, a lot of fidgeting, a lot of, outbursts, a lot of things that I felt like, that's tough to manage in a classroom of 28 or 30 kids, right? So that's where I started, really digging more deeply, if you will, into this kind of work. And so I teamed up with the principal at their school to design an outdoor learning space, but I didn't know what I was doing. What rules are there? What did I need to do? So I searched around in Dane County for other people who had done that before. And from my public health training, I knew that there were multiple benefits from engaging the community in that kind of design. And when I got together with other folks who had done that at other schools, and this was about 15 years ago, we formed a coalition because I also knew a lot about it happened that I did a lot of public health work that was collaborative. I had worked in tobacco control around the state, which really was a massive effort of small community coalitions. So we got some funding through grant writing. I got deeper into how do we train teachers? How do we support this kind of work? And by working sort of around the corner at our school, I ended up taking that work through that coalition, and we expanded outdoor classroom builds and expansions in something like 15 or 20 schools around Dane County. The observations I made while doing that on the ground, working with kids at the school, just as a volunteer, right, were pretty profound. One I remember was during many schools have field days where kids get outside for the day. And it's usually April, May, on a nice
That was
day
my
on a
favorite
Friday,
day.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And this one field day, I was stationed in our outdoor classroom, our garden, and we were going to transplant some cup plants, some big, tall, prairie cup plants. They weren't tall yet, but it took a lot to dig around and get them out of the ground. And so I connected into my training in horticultural therapy and some OT that I had been exposed to, pediatric occupational therapy. And I knew that specific kids could benefit a lot from doing this heavy work, like moving their body and large motor kinds of stuff. So the teachers would send kids out who were having a tough time kind of adjusting to the new routine. And we'd dig holes. We'd get all sweaty and dig
Nice.
holes. And so I had probably 10 or 15 students sort of rotate through this station where we were transplanting cup plants. And I just noticed, some kids would work and start talking about tough stuff that was going on at home, right? I just listened. Or an older child would start working with a younger child and show real sort of patience and aptitude for that, right? In this setting. And the principal called me the next week, and I'm like, oh, what did I do? And she said, teachers are talking about their kids coming back from that station a lot more sort of able to focus, a lot more regulated. Just after 20 minutes, a half an hour, they would come back and they would feel more able to sort of focus and attend. And I was sort of sold, and I watched my own kids. So I took that kind of learning and into my other career forays, if you will. And when I got a different job, I got a job as community health director for the county here in Dane County. Our county's, I guess at that time it was about 500,000, 500,000 people. Now it's about 600,000. And we brought a grant in from the Children in Nature Network and the National League of Cities to really start looking at how we could connect children to green spaces, nearby nature in more equitable ways. Again, I used a community engagement approach to make sure that we had the voices of kids around the table, that we had the voices of parents who, come from typically marginalized communities. And what we did was some good policy change. We got momentum going. There's still an initiative in the city and county. We worked with parks, and we incorporated criteria into early care center certification at the city level. That was one of the policy changes that we got done. And we're really looking at what is the quality of the outdoor space, not just the indoor facilities. The second piece was incorporating criteria for the parks and open space planning processes, as well as the city planning. So cities go through comprehensive plans every 10 years. So how could we build connection to nature criteria into those planning processes? So those are some of the ways. Now I'm incorporating connecting kids to nature into the teaching that I'm doing at the University of Wisconsin. Last semester, I had a group of undergrads come up with designs for a suburban school that had 10 acres of mowed lawn. And their job was to really see what they could do to connect kids to mental and emotional well-being, physical activity, and nutrition education.
Like truly, like round of applause for you. That you went through bureaucratic red tape. You dealt with the very minimal attention span of children. You got people together in a community to get these outdoor nature centers together. That's incredible. I'm taken aback, like truly.
Yes,
Exactly.
absolutely. And I do think that that story right there, getting involved as a parent in your children's school, is not widely talked about or known. I mean, parents are quick to get involved in existing programs or volunteer work, but then to start something new at your children's school, just as a volunteer as well, is really inspiring, I think. And knowing that there is something you can do even as a parent. And outdoor learning is not something that every school thinks about. And so making sure that parents are also involved in that process is incredibly helpful for the students, especially as they go home and want to get outdoors in there on the weekend and other times of the day as well. So, Mary, I actually read your blog or article called Nature Play for Healthy Nervous Systems. And I wanted to talk a little bit about how connecting with nature improves our health and well-being on like a systematic body level.
Sure, happy to. There are so many ways, again, that nature connection, and this is based on research over the last decade or so, that it can improve health and well-being. And in public health, we call those co-benefits. So one intervention, hits a lot of different goals. So we know there are multiple types of health and well-being. People from different cultures define those differently. All of the different types, sort of physical health, social functioning, mental and emotional well-being, right? They all affect our ability to function well in the world, and they all matter, and they all intertwine. So I'll ask you both, right, doing what you do, if you asked 10 teachers across Wisconsin what the most pressing need among the children they're working with might be, what do you think they would say?
Funding. Getting the money to get the resources that are really, really needed, that we're seeing in, like you said, there's a lot of science coming up in like our modern science revolution of how nature actually does have benefits for our kids. So just actually being able to have that money to access these awesome opportunities, I think is probably a general theme I'd get for these answers.
Sure.
Yeah, another need I see is kind of addressing behavioral changes and behavioral tics throughout the day. I know because students spend so much time on their computers and in front of screens, they're more apt to kind of want to move around and want to change things up, and making sure that's kind of integrated into curriculum. Those physical activities or those movement breaks is also kind of, I think, a need I've seen in especially younger children.
So ding, 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 you're both absolutely correct. And I think a lot of that funding, Jaden, folks would love to have more staffing in their schools. People, especially who have some training in
Mhm.
trauma-informed, right, care,
Mhm.
trauma-informed teaching. There's an enormous amount of dysregulation, and it shows up in many, many forms across the developmental trajectory, right? And I think that if we look at that interplay between physical well-being and mental and emotional well-being, you have self-regulation and co-regulation. In other words, sort of kids finding their rhythm based on their relationships with teachers or with other kids. That's all wrapped together in that well-being and the ability to sort of stay focused in school. And so that's where, and Zaya, to your point, when we don't have many resources, the question becomes, where do you start? And I think following children's lead, because we as humans are innately curious. Once one child starts in on, how many different leaf shapes can I find around the playground, right? Other children would be like, leaf shapes? What are you talking about? Leaf shapes, right? Or how many shades of green can we find, given that everybody can see green? But you get my point. The sort of social effect of that curiosity and using children's curiosity to drive inquiry is a very well-established sort of way of teaching. I think that the relationship to physical well-being, those are a little more obvious. So running around, playing heavy play, heavy activity, getting your cardiovascular system going. We all kind of know that that's going to benefit kids, but the kind of regulation benefits, self-regulation benefits that physical activity has are less well known to a lot of folks. And I would argue that engaging kids in those heavy work, as we call them, or as OTs might call them, that heavy work and that sort of big motor activity can really help with releasing endorphins and smoothing out kids' behavior over the rest of the day. The other piece that folks are really dealing with post-pandemic is a deficit in the ability to attend. It's probably, according to research, the thing that's almost most profoundly impacted after having gone through the pandemic for kids is the ability to pay attention. And so we turn to nature-based activities for restoring that ability to attend. So it turns out that when we have to pay focused attention for a long period of time, we get fatigued, we tire out. And some research done by a married couple of psychologists a while back pointed to something called attention restoration theory. And they said that their research showed that exposure to natural environments and what they called restorative environments helped kind of rejuvenate or restore that ability to attend, right? And so they called this sort of restorative environment one that captures people's soft fascination. It's effortless. So if you go into a small natural area that has just enough complexity, there's curiosity that draws you in, and you don't have to make an effort to do that, right? And by spending just 20 minutes in a natural environment that has that sort of richness, you could imagine walking into a greenhouse. You could imagine going out into a small garden space that has herbs or something sensory, right? The ability to sort of pay attention comes back by spending time in that kind of space. And that's in the experience that I had designing our school space and sort of populating with really sensory rich plants and signage. We did signage in lots of different languages. Children would go out and they were just naturally curious in those settings. and they wanted to see the pill bugs, and they wanted to dig some worms, and they wanted to water things. And so if educators are looking for an intervention that's very low cost, that takes very little time, but that really boosts their students' ability to attend, outdoor environments actually offer a huge amount of benefit that way. From fine motor skills to social interaction to fresh air. In fact, there's good research that shows that kids who have been diagnosed with ADHD who are taken out on sort of outdoor adventure learning, excursions, trips, whatever, however long, do really, really well. They actually exhibit an incredible number of leadership skills in those environments because they're not in this highly structured, sit in your seat, right? Sort of don't move, focus, concentrate.
Mm-hmm.
And it even has been suggested by some researchers that ADHD traits and behaviors could actually have been evolutionarily beneficial in unpredictable sort of foraging environments. And some research showed that folks with ADHD could actually leave this whole section of berries behind to go explore new ones, right? And learn all sorts of things about the other foragers.
Their curiosity has taken them far.
Well, and can we think about attention differences not as a deficit, but as an environmental piece that's mismatched with what humans have been evolved to sort of bring to the table, if you will.
Healthier, Happier, Smarter is brought to you by the Wisconsin Association for Environmental Education in partnership with the James E. Dutton Foundation, a charitable foundation providing financial support to organizations working on projects which benefit wildlife, animal causes, environmental preservation, and outdoor education. Additional financial support comes from the Natural Resources Foundation of Wisconsin and WAE members and donors with in-kind support from Green and Healthy Schools Wisconsin. I agree. And it's funny you actually bring that up because my fiance is diagnosed with ADHD, and he had brought up the exact same conversation when I had talked to him about environmental education and outdoor learning. And he said that he does seem a little bit more engaged when it's in an unstructured area, when you have a little bit more freedom to learn how it works best for you. And that kind of goes into my next question, a little bit about the assumption that bringing learning outdoors is distracting for students and that it distracts them from the curriculum or the education that they're supposed to get that day. And I'd love to maybe address that assumption.
Yeah. So I'd say kids do the best they can given the sort of environment they're in, right? And what's been shown to be really effective, just from a practical point of view, is offering really solid behavioral guidelines before entering any space. Like if teachers have to go to a assembly, for example, and somebody's fidgety, right? What are the things that they tell children before going into the big auditorium with lots of ambient noise and whatever? So developing those kinds of behavioral notes and guidelines and sort of incentive structures before you go into an outdoor space is very similar. I think a lot of our challenge right now is that about 20 years ago, we shifted toward a forced march toward tests. And I think really delving into some of the universal design for learning literature and really adapting some of the ways we can get through scope and sequence, we can get through all those milestones in our curricula in creative ways that allow students this opportunity to do that outdoors. There's so much good literature out there and good tools. The Children in Nature Network has a lot of that on their website in terms of what teachers can do to do that kind of learning outside. One example is movable parts on a playground. So kids love designing, and anybody, all of us love designing their own space. So if you have movable parts, and I'm talking about stumps they can roll to another spot, everybody gets worried about stones or rocks being thrown, but, small boulder kinds of rocks that they can't pick up and throw, but they can actually move and make circles out of. There are lots of different movable parts that kids can use to do math, to learn how physics work, right? To learn how to negotiate who's going to do what, the social skills. You can do poetry about that. I mean, the outdoor possibilities expand your horizons so much when you actually just get some tools around that. And they don't have to be expensive. So I would refute distraction and say that you want to kind of encourage exploration, right? Most of
Hmm.
life's big decisions don't actually turn out to happen in a 250 word written essay. The best policy change discussions I've had in my career have taken place while cooking with someone at a gathering, or while, in the meeting after, like the informal space after the conference, where I was able to like small talk about my trip to wherever to hike. We went skiing this weekend. Oh, you did? And then we get into some of the policy stuff. So my point is, I think it's time. What are we doing so right that everybody's just so happy in education? I think
Hmm.
it's time
Yeah.
to disrupt it.
No, I very much agree with the sentiment that a lot of the people in the environmental field feel a lot more organic and passionate about their work when it happens more in an intimate setting. Like if we wove these types of like situations to children's playgrounds, we start that social aspect super early and they get to figure out what they like early on. And now, Zaya, I don't know about you, I'm feeling very inspired. I had my aha moment with Mary. I loved hearing about all of these different things you've done, the people you've worked with. And I hope to all of our listeners, they kind of feel this same inspiration coming from your talk. So I just want to ask you, what is a resource that you think people could go towards if they wanted to start getting involved in environmental education outdoors in their own areas? What resource or opportunity would you recommend?
Yeah. And I know that many educators, teachers are listening to this, along with administrators who are trying to do more with less. I think starting with your own practice nearby, like getting a walk in every day and really noticing phenology, which is basically noticing how the seasons change and what signals you're getting in the seasonal changes. How does the light change? And really spend some time noticing that. How do plants change? What's bird song? John Young's book about bird song is a really great place to start. It's what's it called? What the Robin Knows.
Mm.
That's a great book. The movement and tracks of animals. So starting your own practice so that you see and live the benefit, because as Alda Leopold articulated, right? You start to understand, and then because you understand and experience, you start to care. And after you're caring, you start to steward. And that's what we hope for children. I think for adults, reconnecting with your inner child, talk about the nature connection experiences you've had with other people, and especially with kids. And just one final thing, I think pulling back on our impulse to protect. There's a whole literature. In fact, the Canadian sort of delegation around outdoor learning has really focused in on risky play, or play with beneficial risk. So kids learn how to take risks by taking risks when they're young, and nature offers these just right challenges. And so I'd say pulling back on don't do that or you're going to hurt yourself, right? And instead saying, I think you could try. Let's see what happens. Trust those kids to know their bodies, know when fear will stop them, and let them take those smaller risks because it will serve them in the long run. So those are the places I would start.
Awesome.
Yes, I love the idea of starting with your own practice. I know that in times where I'm feeling a little defeated or kind of down, I love to just go outside and listen. And I love bird songs. So as soon as you brought that up, I just kind of got a little, inspired. If it weren't dark out right now, I'd probably go out there. I have a neighborhood owl that loves to sing me songs sometimes. And so I do think just starting in your own life, starting with the daily practices that you can do every day, whether it's just going outside for a couple minutes in the morning and just watching, listening, being present is incredibly important.
Yeah, you can learn a lot when you pay attention to your senses.
Yeah, and I think our teachers are so maxed out. And I think giving themselves the gift of stopping and being in the present, and then they can actually use that practice with their kids. I think that's going to breed more peace in the world
Yeah.
than, say, enrolling in something else or bringing somebody in, like doing all this extra work, because that kind of practice has a group effect, a social effect.
I couldn't agree more. And Mary, when scheduling this interview, I remembered that I had come to your session at the Green and Healthy Schools Madison conference this last summer, where you were talking about transforming data into storytelling and how you can kind of bring numbers to life. And I still use the little roadmap that you had given us. And it's been a lot of fun thinking about ways to use numbers in a way that, inspires others and isn't just another data point to talk about. And I love now reconnecting with you and talking more about the health aspects of environmental ed.
As well. My pleasure, Zaya.
Yeah, I think I could speak for both Zaya and I. It's been a pleasure having this conversation with you. Is there anything else you want to touch on? Anything else you want to give to the listeners? A little piece of advice before we head out?
I think that your listeners all understand that children are whole people already, and they have a lot that they can actually offer in directing their attention where it needs to go. So getting them into a natural environment, we can help them with. Once we get there, we can be guides rather than sort of directors, if you see what I'm saying. And our bodies come with so much intelligence programmed in. I feel like kids need some more freedom to explore rather than requirements to meet. So we can at least start in affording them that.
If people wanted to know more about you, learn about your work, or follow along on your journey, where might a good place for them to connect with you be?
Oh, that's funny. I deliberately don't really engage too much right now. I do my teaching, but I do a lot of art. So I have an Instagram page. It doesn't necessarily focus on this realm, I'd say, but it's Ginkgo Arts and Letters, and that's my art site.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Mary, and thank you to all of our listeners who are joining us at the time that this will be posted. If you did listen all the way through, I want you to leave a comment saying, "I'm here," and maybe what you're excited for coming up, whether that's a fun trip, an exciting day out, or just spending time alone by yourself. We want to hear about it. So thank you all for listening to Healthier, Happier, Smarter, and we'll talk again soon.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed this episode of Healthier, Happier, Smarter, please take a moment to follow the podcast and leave us a rating or review. It helps more people discover the show and enjoy the conversation about connecting health, learning, and the natural world. You can also stay connected with the Wisconsin Association for Environmental Education at waee.org, or find us on social media for resources, upcoming events, or more stories from educators and community leaders across Wisconsin. Thanks for listening, and until next time, keep exploring, connecting, and learning.